Other sane things are done in society, in this case, early detection, early treatment. And then the vaccine industry comes along and throws their card in and claims they're the ones who made the sun rise when the sun had already risen.
Americans' ability to speak freely is being attacked by this body in Europe, and it needs to stop. It needs to be stopped.
We're in a war, and we all have a part to play, and this administrative takeover of the world involves everybody, whatever you're doing.
They get to determine which vaccines you have to maintain your license. And if you don't do that, you lose your license, you lose your livelihood.
You want to get COVID? Take the COVID shot. It causes COVID. You're more likely to get COVID, never mind all the adverse events.
It's not only the Human Rights Tribunal that's wonky in British Columbia, it's the BC Supreme Court as well.
We got to keep the kids safe. If we don't get the kids to the next generation, if we don't help these children grow up to be functional, intelligent adults who are physically, mentally healthy, that can have children, raise families, etc., then we're done.
Yeah.
So it's super important. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Wins of the Week. Thanks for joining Ted and I once again this week to celebrate the wins of the week, celebrate all the places where the good guys are making advances in medicine, in science, in politics, in law, and in just dropping the truth bombs and telling it like it is. As always, I'm thrilled. This will be for Wins of the Week ending March 7th, 2026. Time is flying. It just seems like yesterday Jesus was here and then Martin Luther King, and here we are. How are you doing, Ted?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a little hectic week as we've got our last couple of days before NCI hearings start on Monday. And there's always a million things to attend to, but it's going to be a very interesting set of hearings, Mark. We're oversubscribed for people that want to testify. So I'm really looking forward to what we're going to learn about Canada and about our food supply and about the future of farming in Canada better. I'm looking
Yeah, I
forward to
can't
it.
underscore how important this one is. And I could see a lot of folks looking, oh, NCI, well, you guys talked about the COVID shots a lot. Then you went on about kids' safety, and my God, did we learn a lot there. That was terrific. But now we're just going to talk about food while everybody eats. But folks, remember those ostriches? That was just a little tip of an iceberg of destroying food supply and undermining farming. And so I'm quite aware, from knowing you, Ted, and others, that the choice to focus an entire NCI hearing on farming and food in Canada is for a very good reason. So for those of you who are breatharians, people who've already transcended time and space and do not need to eat to live, the NCI hearings aren't very important for you unless you love people that are still dependent on food. For the rest of us who still need to eat, NCI Kelowna this week. If you're in the region, it's a chance to get up there and hang out with the crew. And if not, there's going to be a lot of important information coming out from this. Ted, while great things are happening by beautiful people at the NCI in British Columbia this week, there's something else coming up, and you alerted us to this morning in a week. Folks, we've talked about the Health Profession Occupation Acts of BC. Dr. Steve Malthouse did a great job as we toured BC a few years ago, highlighting this thing, which what's most shocking about it for me, Ted, is that they've actually passed this thing into law. And among the implications of this is this: doctors, nurses, chiropractors, nutritionists, anybody involved in healthcare, dentists, etc. You will roll up your sleeve and take any injection the bureaucrats tell you to take. You will shut your mouth. You will never say anything bad about it. You will administer it and sing its praises, and watch my lips, safe and effective. So these lunatics in the BC government there, or whatever that thing is that used to be the BC government, that have passed this, they're clearly not like paying attention to all the dead bodies, etc., from the last round of authoritarianism. But Ted, there's a big deal. What happens April 1st with the Health Professions Occupations Act?
So that's when it actually implements. So it was passed last year. They set the beginning date for the implementation of that new act for April the 1st. And the consequences, there's a number of significant consequences. You've identified one is that as part of the new act, they get to determine which vaccines you have to maintain your license. And if you don't do that, you lose your license, you lose your livelihood. The second is that they have amalgamated, I think, 16 different health professions. Like the doctors had their own, nurses had their own, chiropractors had their own, et cetera, et cetera. They amalgamated them all together under I think, six now. And your profession may be governed by somebody who is not part of your profession. So it used to be that, it was people in the profession that guided and monitored the professionals in their profession. That's no longer the case. The other thing is that it used to be that half of the appointments were done by government, half by people within that profession. That's no longer the situation. The government appoints all of the appointees to those health boards. And then the third consequence is because of it, there's been a massive exodus of health professionals of every profession out of BC, often going into Alberta. The consequence here in British Columbia is that, they're having to close wards, emergency rooms. I know, for example, that in my community of Kelowna, apparently they've had to close the pediatric ward because they don't have enough health professionals to staff it. You'd like to think that they've had more than a year since they passed that legislation to actually figure it out and stop it, but there's going to be a private member's bill introduced on Tuesday of this week by Jordan Keeley suggesting that this be stopped, and we'll see if that has any impact. I am not holding my breath, but I think it's important to acknowledge it, call it out, and have the government show that, they don't know how to humbly back up on bad decisions. So we'll see.
Yeah. Ted, I so respect the doctors, nurses, others in BC who have stood against, the crimes against humanity, the acts of violence through the COVID operation and preceding it, and Charles Hoff and Dr. Malthouse and Dr. Nagacy. But I have to sadly say that I think, friends, doctors, nurses, healthcare providers out there in BC, it's probably a good idea to close your doors before April 1st
Mhm.
and get out of the province. And I know it's sad to think about. It feels like we're abandoning the patients of Canada or we're abandoning the patients in BC. But just being forcibly injected with potential toxins and arm twisted into participating in the medical assault community, it's just unacceptable. And we don't want to see nurses and doctors and others harmed when there's nothing they can do to gain at this point. So great sympathy for everyone in BC, and keep in mind, as of April 1st, it's worse than it was before. It's finalized. Doctors, nurses, healthcare providers, etc., in my opinion, are considered slaves of the state. Bureaucrats who have proven themselves, and politicians for the most part, to be basically minions of the WHO. And that's a very dangerous situation to be in. So I guess that's not so much a win a week, but you know what? Getting out on time, and there ain't much time because this report's coming out March 8th. That means there's 20 20 days,
Mhm.
a little more than 20 days. Well, excellent. So, Ted, one more thing before we go on. Details for the Kelowna hearings this week. What's the days again and the location?
Yeah, so it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. So that's March 9th, 10th, and 11th. It's going to be at the Kelowna Event Center, which is in downtown Kelowna off Harvey, which is the main street through Kelowna. We have a full slate of witnesses eager to testify. I just think to be around good, courageous folks. We're going to have farmers show up. And so I've been told that I can't wear my white socks and sandals and I can't wear tight jeans, that the farmers don't like those kinds of things. So I have to dress up.
Oh, that's it. You need a nice hat and some
Mm.
boots and
Yeah.
some something in your feet to deal with the sweating that happens in boots.
Anyways, I'm looking forward to it. And, I think, you mentioned your earlier comment about this is a new conversation for the NCI. One of the advantages of this is that we are attracting people who didn't even know the NCI existed, that, you know, the whole question about COVID or the safety of children was not on their radar, or those are conversations that they were allergic to having. But we're seeing a group of people wanting to testify and to be part of these hearings that are a completely new audience. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think, a lot of us are more and more realizing whatever your trade is, whether you're a doctor or a farmer or a psychologist or you run a grocery store or whatever it is, we're in a war and we all have a part to play. And this administrative takeover of the world involves everybody, whatever you're
Mhm.
doing. If you're working
Mhm.
in a restaurant, they're coming for you too. So we got to be going for them. And the NCI is a real big front line in that
Yeah,
proactive,
telling the
you know,
truth.
it
Hmm.
sure is. Well, Ted, we got lots of winning. I know we kind of have an excitement about something in Toronto, and I wonder if we want to jump into that now or if we want to come to that in its course.
We'll wait till we get to that, I think, and we'll expand upon it when we
All
get
right.
there. Yeah.
If you're in the Toronto region, hold on. There's some special good news coming for you. Well, I wonder if maybe I can bring out the first political win.
Mm.
The World Economic Forum CEO and president, Børge Brende, has abruptly stepped down after newly exposed emails revealing troubling communications with Jeffrey Epstein, including discussions about a plot to establish global governance. Okay, they were planning to take over the world together, Jeffrey Epstein and President Børge Brende of the WEF. Anyways, the resignation adds yet another powerful name to the widening Epstein scandal. And of course, this just continues to ripple across corporate boardrooms and political circles. And so far, we don't see any handcuffs. But what do you think about this? I mean, this Jeffrey Epstein connections are kind of reaching right to the top of the vampire world, aren't they?
Yeah, I have to admit, Mark, it's not an area that I spend a lot of time with. I've got more other things to focus on, but what I am seeing is that clearly they've released a whole whack of documents, millions of pages of documents, and lots of people at higher levels are stepping down. And as you said, we don't see handcuffs yet, but the fact that they're stepping down, I would suggest that I'll take that as a win. That's a move in the right direction to get bad guys and out of those positions. But it's pretty interesting how that's shaking things up, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. It's definitely a sign of, progress for the good guys and for the truth and freedom. And it reminds me a little bit of something that Ryan Penn of Take Action Canada, I think, said to us a couple of years ago, is they're on their back heels, so keep hitting. And
Right.
I think that's very important. You see these guys, I mean, they're not going to head off to like a church or mosque to repent. I'll tell you that. That's very
Mm.
unlikely. They're going to try to re-strategize. They still have the same goals. So while they're on their back feet, keep hitting.
Well, and Mark, I think my takeaway is you start to realize that, lots of these people at higher levels do bad things, particularly bad things to children. And maybe that's one of the things that keeps them bonded together and have each other's backs because they know each of them could be exposed if they don't toe the global agenda. But the fact that this whole kind of network is being exposed, I think is pretty interesting. We've been saying for years, Mark, that this is the great reveal, and I think this is just another layer of the reveal that we're beginning to have a look at.
Yeah, yeah, it goes beyond the extent of the show, but I have been, researching a little bit about Jeffrey Epstein and looking at some of the content of this stuff. And I highly recommend people look at it, and especially in the context of the endless divide and conquer program being run
Mm.
against us to get us to identify with a certain group. And then if somebody's part of the group that we identify with, then anyone who criticizes them is a bad guy. And this is how, for instance, Christians, Jews, Muslims, left, right, white, black, gay, straight. This is how all of us get suckered in, and we find ourselves supporting some parasite who has taken over a division of society that we identify with.
Mm.
So, I want to say that without saying more, but folks, follow Jeffrey Epstein and look at where he leads. Who is he working for? Who's his real boss, et cetera. And I don't want to answer those questions right now. We'll get some smart people on to do that, but I think a lot of you already know about that.
Yeah.
Well, what do we
And
got from Ottawa, brother?
well, the Ottawa Police Service is the latest police force to say that they won't be participating in the federal government's buyback program. So they made that announcement on March the 2nd. And their excuse is that it would place a strain on police resources dedicated to core policing duties. There's a couple of interesting things in here. One is, well, first of all, let's talk about, what the Liberal government has done is it's banned around 2,500 types of firearms since 2020. And eligible gun owners, have until the end of March to make an online declaration to receive compensation for the banned firearm. Those who do not make a declaration on the banned firearms must dispose or deactivate them before the amnesty period ends on October 30th. After that date, those that are still in possession of the banned firearms will be considered breaking the law and could face criminal charges. So that's basically the map here. Now, this is the interesting part. So, Prime Minister Mark Carney says that the buyback program is not about confiscation, but it is about voluntary return of firearms for compensation. How do you like that for a way to soften what is really tyrannical behavior?
Well,
Um,
what a bit of lying. And I mean, isn't it completely reminiscent? Didn't they also say nobody was forced to take the COVID-19
right.
vaccine? It was all voluntary?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, these people to me have lost the right to open their mouth and keep making sounds because they have no respect for the importance of words and truth. So, anyways, I'm glad to see the Ottawa police, however they can do their part to not disarm the population when you have a foreign authoritarian dictator who wasn't elected running the country. Yeah, that's a good idea. I would like to see as many people as firearm owners and firearm experts, sane, healthy people with good morals, because then I think I'd feel a lot safer in this world.
Mark, I just want to add some thoughts about this. So, anybody who's a serious gun owner is not going to be turning over their weapons. And so come, October the 30th, there's going to be, I think, about 2.5 million criminals now in Canada. I think that that would be absolute chaos if they started to go after those folks. Let me tell you what my hunch is about what's going on here is, the Ottawa Police Services walk hand in hand with the Liberal government. They were the ones that persecuted the Freedom Convoy folks in Ottawa. They're the ones that found Detective Helen Grews guilty of discreditable conduct for investigating sudden infant deaths of our babies. So I don't believe that they finally have seen the light of the truth and are on the good side. I tell you what my hunch is here, Mark. I believe the government's looking for an excuse to back down, and you know, almost every police force in this country, right across the country, has said they're not going to participate in enforcing this gun buyback. And I think what they need is they need an excuse to back away and saying, well, we don't have the police on our side, so we're going to back away. That's the only way I can make sense of Ottawa police publicly saying they won't participate in this program. There's an agenda here, Mark.
That I think that's really important. And I was just celebrating without thinking about that, Dad, because that's very true. Because you go back to the truckers' protest, the freedom rallies of Canada, and in the hearings about that came out, it was the under the table handshaking between the police and the Trudeau Carney liberals was extremely evident. So yeah, I think that your suspicion of less than genuine motives there is important. I guess either way, these guys backing down on disarming the public is a good thing.
Absolutely.
I,
Yeah.
it's a little hard to stop anything short of seeing a bench cleared next to Maduro for Carney and Trudeau so they could all sit together and we could be another liberated country, but we're not there yet.
So, Mark, the other thing in here is that Quebec is the only province that has expressed cooperation with the federal buyback program. And I suspect that they've been experiencing some heat because the Minister of Public Safety in Quebec came out this week and clarified their involvement in the buyback program. And this is what they said. They said, I want to take us back to 2020 when the federal government decided to prohibit more than 2,500 types of firearms. Although they were purchased in good faith and entirely legally by licensed owners, these firearms are now prohibited and can no longer be used or sold. The amnesty period will end on October 30th, 2026. As for Quebec's firearm registration services, at no time can it be used by the federal government to identify firearm owners who are affected by the prohibition. No one will come to confiscate your firearms either. Many people are therefore asking why Quebec is participating in the program. We reached an agreement with the federal government to make it easier for those who wish to do so to obtain financial compensation, plain and simple. To date, thousands of owners have chosen to take the compensation. For us, it was out of the question to let the federal government implement the program in Quebec, and we made it clear that Quebec's registry, firearms registry, will not be used. So I just find that interesting, Mark, is that for the Quebec Minister of Public Safety to come out and really, in some ways, I think this is a mea culpa saying, don't worry, we're not on the side of the feds.
Yeah, I think that seems like a good stance. Ted, I wonder too, and I haven't looked into it, how much are they offering people for the guns that they chose to purchase? And I think there's two options. One is they're giving them a cheap offer and kind of twisting their arms to give it up. or they're offering them a bunch once again to disarm the population. But I think to myself, well, who's paying for it? Like, who's going to pay these people for the guns? And I
You know
don't
who
think
is.
it's Mark Carney from the billions of dollars he's milked as a globalist. I think it comes once again from the taxpayers.
Yeah.
So I think we should all just walk away from the thing. And it doesn't seem like it's something to participate in any way. I think I'd almost wonder if somebody was thinking of running in there and giving their guns to these guys because you're desperate of money because you gotta, I don't know, pay your rent or
You know what,
something.
Mark,
Maybe
I
you
think
should sell to a friend.
what I think would make more sense is they should have a buyback program from those that own the firearms illegally. Don't you think that would make more sense?
Yeah, that's what they should do. That way the government doesn't have to give it to them to wreak havoc on the streets. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're being facetious, folks. We're all for like, sane, lawful gun ownership. Well, here's something. This is a big one if you don't want to be tied down and forced into medical procedures of any sort. There was a 31 to 20 party line vote in the Arizona House of Representatives which passed a medical freedom bill. So this isn't enacted yet, but it's passed as a bill. If enacted, the bill would bar the state government, businesses, and schools from requiring residents to obtain a medical intervention, like a genetic vaccine, including a vaccine, in order to work, enter a public space, or attend a school. The bill's successful passage in the House signals the quiet revolution underway, according to Ursula Conway, who's the president of Children's Health Defense Arizona chapter. And she said this. She said, Arizona's success signals a tidal shift in voters' attitudes towards our government. Many of us were shocked out of complacency by egregious government edicts. We are awake and we are holding legislators accountable. Further, she said, medical mandates run contrary to the principles on which the U.S. was founded. People should not be forced to choose between their bodily autonomy and their ability to work, to learn, to travel, and basically just to participate in life. It has been drummed into the minds and hearts of Americans that we have to have these medical interventions to protect us from disease and death. But in actuality, we're pointing out no, we're the sickest we've ever been, that this is an individual right to be able to choose. Well said.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty encouraging, isn't it, Mark? I mean, what they're upholding here is our bodily sovereignty, our right to medical choice, to make decisions for our own health and well-being. And so I would agree. This is the beginning of a quiet revolution. I would say it's not so quiet anymore. It's starting to grow, where the mandates that we experience globally with COVID-19 has really awakened people. They're saying it's time to get back to the fundamentals of that were there when the US was founded, and the fundamentals when Canada was founded too, that we thought we were individual freedom. And so we have to protect that.
Yeah. Well, Ted, I had a fascinating conversation with the historian Mather Errett this week, which was going to,
Mm.
elaborate on that point. So folks, look for that one coming up.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, he was in the news last week. He's here again this week, and he put out a legal opinion to those that are in the mental health providers in the state of Texas. He's saying that it's illegal to transition children. And so this is just a clarification because Texas actually passed a bill back in 2023 which banned gender affirming care procedures such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgeries for those children with gender dysphoria. There was some question about whether those in the mental health field could still work with those confused kids. And what Paxton said is that the law also applies to those mental health care providers. He said that the path to kids being transitioned often starts with unethical indoctrination by activists providing, and so quotes, mental health care designed to confuse children about their gender. And he went on to say any radical facilitating the transitioning of our kids is committing child abuse. The law is clear. These are radical procedures and they're illegal. In no world should Texas dollars be used to permanently harm children. This opinion should send a clear message warning that there will be consequences for any medical professional, whether a doctor or a therapist, who is illegally transitioning Texas kids. Nice to see, nice to hear.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I mean, of course, Yes, and the physical abuse, but and the mental abuse too,
Absolutely.
because they're so
Yeah.
connected. Ted, I get a warm, fuzzy feeling about Texas lately. And that's, it's because of Texas Attorney General and a few other things reported out of Texas. And, it reminds me of the innocence I had as a child. I lived in a town called Blenheim, Ontario, and we had the
Mm.
Blenheim Police. This was before the provincial government amalgamated police forces and made them all OPP and really, kind of released a whole gang on the province that way. But back in the day, towns had a police. Police cars used to say on the side to serve and protect. That's something we got to put back on whatever sort of police cars we're going to have in the future.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling safe. I remember feeling
Yeah.
like you're walking down the street and you see a cop car. You're like, oh boy, we're no, the bully's not going to beat me up right now because I remember like the criminals were afraid of the cops.
Yeah.
And I used to say hello to the policemen as kids. We used to wave at the police when they walked by. They were our heroes. They protected us. They did. I remember lots of times police, did good things, it seemed, and kept
Yeah.
kept life sane. And now we've been through a period where the police have been totally weaponized by globalists, foreign entity occupying our fake old world governments.
Mm. Mm.
And and when I look at what's happening in Texas with this attorney general, I just feel like, wow, you imagine how nice it must be to be in Texas and kind of look at police. We saw a little while ago where one student was sort of counter protesting peacefully in support of ICE during the whole ICE riot frenzies going on down there. And other kids come up and started punching him in the face. And the police came. And you know what was wild? They didn't arrest Billboard Chris. They didn't take away the kid who was going against the globalist agenda. They took the kid who just punched somebody in the face and committed assault.
Yeah.
I just love it. I hope I get to go visit Texas soon.
Mm.
And I just want to walk down the street with a big hat and a pair of boots, feeling real safe.
Well, and you compare this legal opinion that Ken Paxton put out this week, compare that to Canada. Here in Canada, our parliament, our federal parliament passed Bill C4 a number of years ago, and it passed unanimously. So not only the Liberals, but the Conservatives, the NDP, the Bloc, the Green, they all passed this that says you cannot provide counseling to those kids that are confused about their gender. You have to go along with their confusion and participate in the maiming and killing of children. Canada's on the opposite end of the spectrum of Texas. I'm hoping that what happens in Texas will eventually rub off and we might have a little bit more sanity in this country.
Yeah. And we have to underscore there for how dangerous it is in Canada. And I'm reminded of the case of, forgive me, I can't remember her name at the moment. I'll put something up about her, but a very nice woman I met in Alberta, as well as her mother, on the subject of their daughter who was murdered using COVID-19 shots. And this capture of medical professionals, it's coming up again and again. What you just said about Bill C4, doctors in the country being told, like, if a kid comes in and says, yeah, I want to turn into a boy, I want to turn into a girl, the doctor has to just say yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No saying, hey, let's talk about this. What's got you feeling this way? No, 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 no. Now you're going
Yeah.
against the agenda. And the same thing with forced injections out in BC. It just happened across the whole country. And here's the danger that I see, and this is where we cannot ignore the hard reality in front of us. Because this young woman who died as a result of injections she knew not to take, she knew better to take. She was medically educated. She was a budding star, just getting into her clinical work, and she was told, "You take the shot to keep the job,"
Yeah.
in Alberta. And the mother said, "Well, why don't you go talk to our doctor? Because you've known her since you were born. It's someone we trust." And so she went to see her doctor, who she'd known her whole life, who she could trust. But she didn't see the proverbial gun to the back of that doctor's head saying, "You say safe and effective, or we're going to hurt you and your family." That's the reality of it. So it's so beautiful to see what is unfolding
Yeah.
some places. And it also reminds us where we are that we have to play the game different, keep those kids safe, keep them alive. Well, speaking of keeping people safe from being poisoned, Congressman Thomas Massey, we were all shocked. Let's face it, we were all shocked and horrified. And it's one of a few reasons a lot of people right now are going, Trump, what the heck are you doing, man? Which was the attempt to shield glyphosate and Roundup and the companies selling it from lawsuits. So
Mhm.
Congressman Thomas Massey has introduced the No Immunity for Glyphosate Act. And it is a direct response to Trump's attempt to shield glyphosate and Roundup and the companies selling it. And this new bill states, quote, no federal funds may be used to implement, administer, or enforce the executive order entitled Promoting the National Defense by Ensuring an Adequate Supply of Elemental Phosphorus and Glyphosate-Based Herbicides, which was issued on February 18th, 2026. Further, the bill states any person or the estate, survivors, or legal representative of such persons who suffers or has suffered physical injury, illness, disease, or death caused in whole or in part by exposure to elemental phosphorus, or more importantly, a glyphosate-based herbicide manufactured, distributed, sold, or supplied within the United States may bring a civil action in an appropriate district court of the United States against any coveted entity. It goes further. In a civil action under this section, the court may award the compensatory damages, including damages for medical expenses, lost income, pain and suffering, and wrongful death, as well as punitive damages and equitable relief, including declaratory and injunct relief. And lastly, their attorney's legal fees.
Mm.
Ted, have you some thoughts on this? What an interplay within the
Yeah.
U.S. federal government.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see this. I mean, I'm like you. I was shocked when Trump introduced that bill to protect glyphosate, calling it a national defense action, and Bobby Kennedy supporting that. I was horrified, actually. And what's embedded within that legislation was providing immunity to Bayer, which is the company that makes glyphosate. This is one of the things that I like, at least in the United States, is there are different points of view, political points of view. And so Congressman Thomas Massey introduces a bill to say no, that no immunity for glyphosate. The problem we have in Canada, Mark, is that there's only one party. It's the Unit Party of Canada. It doesn't matter whether your name is labeled as Liberal or Conservative or NDP. It seems they're all not working for the people. They're working for somebody else. Anyways, I'm encouraged by this. We'll see whether it has, it will be passed or not. But the fact that it's being introduced, I think, again, at least it forces some dialogue, some debate. It puts this issue out into the open, which is sorely lacking in this side of the border.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd like to underline a little bit of the science of this glyphosate, and I'll do a deeper dive and publish something about glyphosate in the near future. But I can see a lot of folks saying, hey, organic farming is hard to do, especially when you monocrop, when you're looking at the current ways that we grow massive
Yeah.
food supplies for massive amounts of people. And as much as I think a lot of us are recognizing to cut back on the carbs, cut back on the breads, sort of get away from that carbohydrate-based diet. But the big issue being put forward here is wheat, is that we need it for the wheat because we eat a lot of flour. We eat a lot of bread-based or wheat-based products. But here's the thing. Glyphosate isn't being added to wheat early in the growth process
Right.
to get rid of the bugs, right? To get rid of the weeds
Well,
that
it is.
would.
It's added then, and it's added at the end of the process.
That's the concerning one is at the end it's being added just because it dries up the crop. It's being used as a desiccant, which means there's no time for the rain to wash it away.
Yeah.
So that is going directly into the mouths of the people. And you can be sure there's a more benign way to dry something out than spraying glyphosate or hairspray or whatever you might have that'll dry things out. You can dry things out by spraying gasoline on them. It doesn't mean it's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for folks to be aware. And glyphosate, I mean, there's a lot of health risks with it, but no question, well established years ago, six-fold increase in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from glyphosate exposure. Yeah.
Mark, this
Well,
next
here,
one's, yeah,
yes.
yeah. I think you and I both got a chuckle out of this. So a new website has been launched to hold Mark Carney to account. It contains documented records of broken promises, federal policy reversals, and unchecked spending of the Prime Minister. And I spent a little bit of time on it. It's actually well done. Somebody's put a lot of time and energy and effort into this.
Yeah, it's incredible. And one of the things that jumped right off the website when I looked at it, and folks, this website is called carneywatch.ca, easy to find. Carney, carneywatch.ca, was the deficit budgets that he's running. And a lot of people were fooled into voting for him. I think not enough people for him to actually win a fair election, in my opinion, but enough people for it to look reasonable that maybe he did win an election. But I talk to a lot of people who are very uninformed in political that spend very little time researching things other than their hobbies and their favorite sports team. And they had a very simple thing. They're like, well, Mark Carney is a financial
Yeah,
expert. So, and we got money troubles because of Trump and the tariffs. And so we need a money guy. It's like, he ain't a money guy that's looking out for you folks. He's a money
Yeah.
guy that will suck you dry for the globalists. And when you see, people elected this guy because he was going to be great with the money, and then you look at these massive, like, oh yeah, we're going to put the country in debt another $78 billion this year, etc. It's quite obvious that he's not our man.
He's not working for us, Mark.
No, no. Well, Ted, we got something a little close to my heart. We're in the medicine and health section, and this H5N1 business being used to cull herds, and we had a heck of a back and forth between the corrupted government and individual citizens and rights over 400 ostriches, which were in the end were like just murdered, killed. I don't know if you call it murder when it's an animal, but
Brutally.
in any
Yeah.
event, people's private property was shot. But folks, and Ted, you and I've pointed this out, this ain't about 400 ostriches,
Mhm.
folks. Ultimately, this is about whether or not your kids are getting extremely skinny and their bellies start bloating because they're so low in protein that they get ascites in their belly. That's what starvation looks like in the early phases. And authoritarians have been using it. And H5N1, I've pointed out before, is a scam in this direction. So, anyways, as the number of birds culled in an avian flu outbreak on turkey farms near Strathroy, Ontario, approaches 100,000, they have just used tax dollars to kill 100,000 turkeys. That's a lot of food. Anyways, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency says it won't let its staff do media interviews for
Mhm.
fear they will be subject to harassment or even death threats. About 95,000 birds have been affected at 5 different turkey farms in the area where an outbreak of a cold began on November 26th. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency minions report that. And one expert calls it problematic, saying the public is missing vital information during an outbreak. The CFAA also isn't providing a spokesperson for media interviews. The agency said that since it culled just over 300 ostriches after an avian flu outbreak on a farm in BC, an avian flu outbreak. Do you remember watching those ostriches running around coughing, sneezing, wheezing, having an avian
Yeah.
flu outbreak? Just absolute BS. So the bottom line is the CFI is killing our food supply and birds en masse in Ontario at this time. And they're saying that we're not going to talk to you about it, and we're not going to let our any of our people talk to the media, and we're not going to have a spokesperson because you're all so mean and you might hurt us. Am I getting that story right, Ted?
You got it. You got it. Yeah. Yeah. They've been harassed since the ostrich situation, and so they've decided that they're not going to talk to the public about why they're doing what they're doing. I think I've mentioned last week, but I'll just confirm that as part of my role with the National Citizens Inquiry, I reached out to the president of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Minister of Agriculture, and a number of others to invite them to testify at the NCI in Kelowna. And I can confirm that all of them that I have invited have all turned down that invitation to testify, saying they have more important matters to attend
They have more important. I thought they closed Epstein Island. Where are they going now, these buggers?
to. Yep.
Oh. Well,
Uh,
let's talk HPV. What's going on there?
Well, this is a pretty good one for, I think, for us, Mark. It starts off saying the widely circulated claim that the HPV vaccine dramatically reduced cervical cancer risk by as much as 80% if administered before age 16 collapses under closer examination. This, according to Lucia Tolnevic. She said that the safety and efficacy claims of the HPV vaccine are unsubstantiated, and the benefits of the vaccine do not outweigh the risks. She said if the vaccine dramatically reduced cervical cancer, it follows that there would be a clear population level decline of the disease following widespread vaccination. But she presented national cervical cancer statistics from the UK, Australia, and the US, showing that cancer rates had been declining and in some groups were already near zero before the HPV vaccine was introduced. She said in Australia, despite very high vaccination rates, there has been no corresponding dramatic improvement when it comes to cancer rates. She says health officials and vaccine makers claim that the vaccine prevents cancer. However, none of the clinical trials nor studies included whether the vaccine actually prevented cancer. And I think that's the important thing, Mark. And Yeah, what I've learned this with all of the vaccines, we think that, the studies prove something like that it prevents cancer. You learn that no, that was never the end point of their study. They identify something else like antibodies and say, oh, if you generate antibodies, then it's effective. They never have to prove that the vaccine actually does what they claim that it does. I think this is a great expose. What she says is that exposing healthy children to long-term, unpredictable, and incompletely understood vaccine risks for no proven substantial benefit is utterly unscientific, unreasonable, immoral, and plain reckless. And then she goes on to say PAP screenings carry no risk of autoimmune complications or neurological injury and have already driven substantial declines in mortality. So, pretty good takedown of the HPV vaccine, Mark.
Yeah, it's a really good and important statement, and folks need to understand this, and I hope I can get away with 60 seconds medical science with Dr. Trozy on this one. So, I mean, what were we taught? Cervical cancer is a very real cancer risk for women. The human papilloma virus, or one variant of it, causing a wart in the vagina and the cervix, predisposing and advancing to a cervical cancer. Yeah, I think that's a reality. So what were we doing for a long time? One thing is, to a degree, safe practices of sexuality is one of the great ways to reduce all kinds of diseases that way. But stepping beyond that, we did pap smears, totally not non-invasive, simple thing. About every year, women would go get a pap smear, and then you could look at the cervical cells under a microscope and see if there's changes that are changes going in the direction towards cancer. And early detection did great things for cervical cancer because the treatment for a very early cervical cancer is mild. The woman often is able to maintain most of the cervix and the uterus, still be able to have children, all that sort of stuff. Early detection is a real thing. And I'm surprised to see in this, and I wasn't aware of this, that the cancer rates had dropped before the vaccine was introduced. So it's that same scam we saw with measles and everything else.
And polio,
Other
yep.
things,
Yep.
other sane things are done in society, in this case, pap smears, early detection, early treatment. And then the vaccine industry comes along and throws their card in and claims they're the ones who made the sun rise when the sun had already risen. But I think more important than this, and I'm going to share the link, and if you folks would just see, just go to Dr. Trozy and search James Lyons Weiler, an interview I did with him. This is one of the things we talked about. And this is called type replacement. And this is actually where this HPV can totally backfire and have negative efficacy in the long run, which is this HPV vaccine targets certain viral strains of the human papillomavirus, which are common and can be oncogenic, can lead to cancer. However, what happens is when you eliminate them by mass vaccination against them, when you reduce those particular variants, other strains will fill the evolutionary or the
Mhm,
biological
mhm.
void. And guess what we're finding out? They're more aggressive cancer causing types.
Yeah.
So the HPV vaccine is taking credit for something it never did. Pap smears is a great idea. People should keep doing that. And when you actually look at the science, it's much more likely that there'll be more cervical cancer caused by HPV vaccine because of these injections. And I think what makes it even more dangerous, before I set down the anvil on this one, is if people are saying, well, I got the HPV vaccine, so I don't need to do pap smears. I'm safe for life. That's a big danger
Right.
because in reality, it will probably have a negative efficacy. And then you have women growing cervical cancers and not getting them detected
Yeah.
early. So, folks, please go back to what made sense before the vaccine industry was running everything.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Mark, there's more than 200 different types of HPV virus. And the vaccine only, initial one covered what, nine, and now the next one covers 16. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I
And
believe so.
anyways, the bottom line is that it's covering a fraction of the number of virus types that are out there, HPV types. And as you target one, it allows the next one to pop up. It's like whack-a-mole in a way. And there's no evidence that even one person's cancer has been prevented from the vaccine, much less, millions like they like to claim. And of course, there's no talk about the risk of the vaccine, which is significant. Bobby Kennedy says I would say next to the COVID shot, it's the most dangerous vaccine on the market.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I have to admit, in clinical practice, I've seen a lot of women suffer major health deterioration, often in gynecologic matters, after being fooled, like a lot of us were, into the
Mhm.
HPV vaccine scandal.
Yep.
Well, Ted, you've got to announce this next one because
Okay.
nobody has worked harder in this country to make these kind of things happen.
Well, I think this might be the biggest win of the week. So, the Toronto Public Health announced in a public statement this week that 30,000 Toronto students who have not received their routine childhood vaccines, they're not up to date, or have not filed a vaccine exemption, are no longer at risk of suspension during the 2025-26 school year. So what they're saying is that we know that there's 30,000 students who haven't complied with the requirement that they either be fully vaccinated or that they get an exemption. We're not going to do anything about that this year. And they're saying that, they're doing that to reduce the administrative burden on families and schools, and they're going to give families time to, get caught up. Let me tell you what's going on here. What this says is that more and more families have lost their trust, their confidence in the childhood vaccine schedule. They are now abandoning complying with that. But not only, Mark, are they not complying with the vaccination mandates that are in Ontario, they are not bothering to file for an exemption. They're saying, piss off. I don't have to ask for permission not to inject my kid. And these numbers, they give the number of 30,000, which is pretty significant. But when you read the fine print, what you discover is that that's the number of students between grade 2 and grade 5. That's not the full spectrum all the way to grade 12. This is a narrow part of the spectrum, and it's only students in the Toronto region. So when you think about the numbers likely in the entire province of Ontario who are not complying with these vaccine mandates, this vaccine tyranny, I suspect you're talking about 100,000, hundreds of thousands possibly. Anyways, from my perspective, this tells me people are figuring this out. They're waking up. They're saying, I will not comply. And the public health of Toronto is trying to find a nice way to back out of this without looking weak. And so instead, they're saying, we want to reduce the administrative burdens on families and schools. Bullshit. The reality is families are not complying, and they know that if they push the envelope, they're going to have 30,000 kids just in the Toronto region and just in those grades that are going to be out of school. And that also means those schools don't get the funding for the days that those kids are out of school.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'd like to encourage people working in Toronto Public Health and in all the institutions who are just not quite fully getting the idea of what the truth means. And the truth and freedom movement, it's just being bold with the truth, not being closed-minded. But I think that we're too far down the road. We've achieved too much. And I think these people who are, I guess, like in the old days, say super squares, who are still believing stuff that's just not true anymore. The majority of the population no longer supports forced injection of people with
Yeah.
anything. Probably the majority of the population is figuring it out for sure that the COVID shots were toxic, and I think starting to figure it out about a lot of the vaccine industry. So go ahead, put your water wings on, bureaucrats, and jump in the pool and join us and just come out and say it. We're not going to force people to inject their kids with stuff because it was all nonsense in the first place, as opposed to this kind of treading. But either way, Ted, I got to say congratulations to you. Congratulations to Vaccine Choice Canada. Congratulations to a lot of our listeners. Because as you said, that 30,000 is probably more like 200,000. And I think it's a statement of where we're going. And I like what you said. Ted, people are saying, no, I'm not going to get on my knees and apply
Yep.
for you to approve God who gave me a religious. No, I don't need that. I
Yep.
don't need an exemption. Get away from my kid and stop trying to stick needles in them. I'll decide needles for my kids with the doctor or nurse I trust when and where I can find one.
Yep.
Well, the Arizona Senate has advanced legislation that would embed into state law a mandatory review of recent vaccinations and other pharmaceutical countermeasures in every case of sudden and explained infant death. Ted, we reported on this.
Yeah.
This is now law. We were celebrating as this was being written. Now we're celebrating it's the law. So, many parents, doctors, and researchers suspect a vaccine role in SIDS. Me too. the SIDS being sudden infant dying syndrome. And we know that, the kids who have SIDS usually have it shortly after they receive the vaccine, or maybe a bunch of them all injected at the same time, along with the aluminum and the mercury and all that. Anyways, the legislative move would standardize investigative transparency, ensure recent medical interventions are formally examined, and create a documented record that could increase data visibility and accountability surrounding infant death syndrome. The bill inserts the following language. May I quote? In cases, boy, Helen Grews, can you hear this? Helen, if you're out there,
Yeah.
you're so right. You're so good. Listen to this. This is now the law in Arizona where police can do their job. In cases of a sudden and unexplained infant death, the medical examiner or forensic pathologist shall review the infant's immunization and vaccination history and any countermeasures that were administered in the 90 days before the infant's death. And Ted, you pointed out, like, contrast this with Canada, Ottawa, Helen Grews.
Yeah. So for those that I think our audience is pretty familiar with, but let me, for those that aren't, Detective Helen Grews was part of the sexual assault and protection team with Ottawa Police Services. And part of their mandate is that whenever there's a sudden death of an infant or a young child, that team investigates. And a standard part of the investigation when there's an infant that dies is to ask the parents about the vaccine status of the infant as well as the mother. And so Detective Helen Grews was following standard procedure, but because of the political ramifications of the questions that she was asking, she was charged and found guilty of discreditable conduct by the Ottawa Police Services for asking the question of whether the mother took a vaccine, whether the infant took a vaccine. And here we are again. We talk about the two ends of the spectrum, Canada and the United States. Here in Arizona, they have passed state law that requires a mandatory review of vaccine status as well as other pharmaceutical measures in the case of an unexpected sudden infant death. That's exactly, it wasn't law in Canada, it was just practice. Now you're not allowed to do that. In Canada, the police services have passed new policy that says if there's a matter that has political implications, you have to ask permission before you conduct an investigation. Detective Helen Grews hadn't even conducted an investigation. She hadn't got that far. She just started to ask some questions. And for that, she was found guilty of discreditable conduct. So we no longer have independent policing in Ontario. What it tells you is that they really don't want to know or explain the cause of the infant deaths because, I believe that the data is pretty clear. Most sudden infant deaths happen within days of the vaccination. But they say vaccines are safe and effective and necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a parallel, or such a kind of a contrast.
Yeah,
And it makes me so proud of Helen Grews as a Canadian.
yeah,
And I'm reminded Dr. Latipo wrote something on his X a while ago about me, and he said, "I'm so proud," or something to that effect, to meet doctors like Dr. Trozy who are willing to lead. And Helen Grews, even more so than myself, deserves that, because when you do the right thing, even when the institutions around you are corrupt, Helen Grews is leading.
yeah,
She's leading. And then when you look at a sane part of the world, or a part of the world where it's further ahead at regaining human rights and overcoming the recent violence of big pharma, like Arizona, and you see what Helen Grews said, I must do. It's the right thing. They're saying everyone must do. It's
yeah.
the right thing. And I mean, again, we hate to lose everybody in the north half of Turtle Island, but I think we should recommend Helen. She's willing to live in Arizona. It's kind of dry there, but they do have swimming pools. But they're probably looking like for someone like Helen to, like, really lead, like Dr.
Yeah,
Latipo said, people that can
yeah,
lead and prove they can lead. And when you can do the right thing in Arizona, now it's going to be easy because you have to. You're a pathologist, you have to ask about vaccination status of that dead baby in front of you. But when you can lead, like Helen Grews did, when they're gonna try to brutalize you and destroy you and your family, that's a real test of your
mhm.
mettle. So God bless you, Helen. God bless Arizona. They should have a Helen Grews festival in Arizona, maybe.
So I'll just mention, I think I've talked about this before, Mark, but I'm part of the GRU's Justice Project, and one of our initiatives is to create a documentary. The title is Silencing Detective GRUs, and it's being produced by Todd Harris, who's done films for us in the past. He's done the Uninformed Consent, did that for Vaccine Choice Canada a couple of years ago. Anyways, Todd has updated me to say that the film is essentially done. He thinks it's going to be ready for May. And we'll be looking for both donations to support the cost of producing the film, but also screenings right across the country. So as I've got more information about that, we'll share it, Mark. And I've seen clips of the documentary. I think it's going to be a very powerful documentary that's going to blow the lid off both the medical profession in Canada as well as our law enforcement. So it should be pretty dynamic.
Ted, for folks wanting to learn more, get more involved, support, etc., can you remind us the website for the Helen Grews Justice?
Yeah, it's GRUS, GRUS, justiceproject.org. And we're still building the website, but it has the trailer on it, it has some articles on it, and we're wanting to upload all of the documents that were submitted for her defense that the Ottawa Police Services Tribunal refused to be allowed into the tribunal. So we're going to share it with the public.
Excellent. Well, Ted, what can we say about the radical fringe minority in the country?
Well, this is we were talking about there's a sea change that's happening. There's a shift and people are waking up around medical choice, around informed consent, around medical tyranny. And so in the US, there was a poll that was undertaken, and the results are pretty interesting. So, the corporate media would have you believe that anybody who questions vaccinations, is part of a fringe minority. They're anti-vaxxers, anti-science, and they shouldn't be trusted. Well, what's happening is that those folks now are not the fringe minority. They're actually the majority and quite by a significant number. So this recent poll asked people their views on a number of issues, but mostly it was related to the issue of informed consent. And 88% of respondents, and this was across the political spectrum, it was Democrats and Republicans alike, said they believe that a patient must retain their full right to refuse any medical treatment. And when they asked specifically about vaccines, 80% said they believe that any adult has the right to refuse vaccination. 70% expressed the view that one's refusal to be vaccinated should never result in any form of discrimination, such as employment or access to public accommodation. Those are pretty impressive numbers, Mark. When you think about 85% of Americans took the COVID shot, now we've got 85% of Americans saying people should have the right to refuse a medical treatment. That I would say that's a complete flip of where American public were at just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ted. It's a big shift. And I think that shift would be 100% if people just had the time and had access, not to the propaganda, but to some of the real science. I mean, like the COVID shot, negative efficacy. You want to get COVID? Take the COVID shot. It causes COVID. You're more likely to get COVID, never
Yeah.
mind all the adverse events. And we see that with a lot of things. The measles outbreaks, and you find out, oh, well, what was the source of the measles virus in the measles outbreak? Not that a measles outbreak is a big deal, especially for unvaccinated people with healthy immune systems. But turns out, oh, well, look, it actually came from a supposed vaccine strain. Same with polio. And so I think all of us would go from 88% to 100% very quickly if we knew the full scenario. But either way, we're gaining ground. And I think unfortunately, I think that's just part of how the human body, I mean, all of us together works is everybody's not doing all the science, but little by little, the truth is lying and it ends up
Yeah.
shaping the opinion. So thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, that brings us into the legal win division. X, formerly known as Twitter, the censorer, and then becoming X, not the censorer. And we're going to have to admit, for all the mixed feelings folks have, thanks to Elon Musk for X, for where it's going. But, anyways, X has filed a landmark legal challenge last Monday to a $140 million fine imposed by the European Commission under the European Union's Digital Services Act. And this is a sweeping censorship regime that uses American technology companies to impose European speech restrictions on users worldwide. And the appeal marks the first ever judicial challenge to a fine issued under this DSA, given EU courts their first opportunity to examine whether the law's enforcement complies with fundamental rights and the rule of law. Anyways, the platforms that the DSA targets, including X, Google, Meta, and others, are the modern public square. They are where Americans debate politics, share their faith, and hold the powerful accountable. And the EU's Digital Services Act is designed to control what can be said in that square, and its reach does not stop at Europe's border. The DSA threatens 16 American-owned platforms with fines of up to 6% of their global annual revenue for violating vague, easily weaponized standards such as hate speech and disinformation. Further, if the EU can dictate what Americans say online, free speech becomes a privilege granted by foreign bureaucrats, not a right granted by God. Citizens, lawmakers, and companies who value open debate must stand with X and insist that the digital public square remains free. And there's a link to the whole article
Yeah.
there at adflegal.org.
Yeah.
Ted,
Think,
what are your thoughts on this situation of censorship out of Europe for the whole world?
well, I think it's totally unacceptable. I mean, I don't think it's acceptable in Europe, but the fact that they're trying to impose that same standard of censorship around the world through these kinds of fines is, well, to me, this is tyranny, right? This is extortion. And thankfully, someone like Elon Musk is willing to stand up and fight that battle. You would think the United States government would fight that battle and defend the free speech in their country, because that's effectively what's happening is Americans' ability to speak freely is being attacked by this body in Europe, and it needs to stop. It needs to be stopped.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
these globalists, the European Union, etc., they're counting on humans to be too stupid in one way. One, they like the idea that humans are too stupid to hear a bunch of people talk and decide what to think for themselves and use critical thinking. And it's a reason, we recommend people, hey, like unplug that boob tube and that fake news and do some real study in life so that you do have a good brain and you can decipher things. And I think people actually, the people I meet on a one-to-one basis do. And the other thing, they're counting on the idea that people are stupid enough that they can program them like sheep and control all the media and just program them with thoughts, and everybody will go along with it and all dance off the cliff, thanking them for driving them there. And so in the fight against that, I'm certainly supporting Elon Musk and the X in that countersuit.
Yeah.
Well, what do we got for foster families in Vermont?
Well, there's been some court challenges there, and Vermont officials have responded by introducing new policy that clarifies the criteria for a family to be a foster family. The new policy says they don't have to abandon their religious beliefs and they don't have to promote gender ideology to qualify as foster parents anymore. And this comes after attorneys representing two Christian foster families appealed a lower court ruling that blocked those families from being foster parents because they were unwilling to use the pronouns of gender confused children. As a result, they were excluded. And so they went to court, and the senior counsel says no parent should be forced to lie to a vulnerable child about who they are, much less promote irreversible and life-altering procedures that don't have any proven health benefits. The updated policy clarifies that endorsement or affirmation of specific identities or the use of particular vocabulary, prescribed language, or preferred pronouns related to gender identity, sexual orientation, or identity expression is not a condition of licensure. So nice to see that they're stepping away from that edge of the cliff where they were forcing foster families to participate in the cult of gender confusion.
Oh, that's beautiful. Vermont is no longer just a place to go for a good
Yeah.
ski. It's a safe place for children too, even if they go into foster care. Well, here's something. Nikki Gaylard is seeking justice against the Department of Education in Australia after her daughter was exposed to disturbing sexual content in school. Gaylord's 14-year-old daughter was subjected to graphic, traumatic content as part of this lesson. Parents were not notified about the content, and students were not given the option to opt out of this disturbing content. Additionally, there were no teachers present in this room while a third-party provider shared the lesson. The third-party education provider refused to allow parents to view the presented material. Gaylord has Gaylord has stated that she took this case forward because I'm seeking justice for my daughter who was deeply affected by what she saw that day. Her childhood was shortened through exposure to completely inappropriate material that the provider won't even let me see. How can they be happy to show to children what they are ashamed to show to the adults? Ted, wise words from Nikki Gaylord.
Yeah, thank you to Nikki for standing up and protecting not only her daughter, but all of the children in that subject to the Department of Education in Australia. How bizarre, though, that this third-party educator refuses to disclose the material that they shared with children. You know, if you were proud of what you were doing, you would be glad to show it. So it tells me that they know that what they're doing is inexcusable and they're trying to hide or cover for themselves. I hope that there's some serious consequences to that provider and to the Department of Education who allowed this to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think this is a really important issue, Ted. Just like with injections, just like COVID genetic injections, once you stick it in a kid, you can't suck it out,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So while we're involved in the fight to protect our children from people that want to stick them mentally or physically, we can't let them stick them mentally or physically because what she says is very valid. I mean, her 14-year, think about when you're 14 in a healthy, innocent world, right? I mean, there's a lot of important elements of innocent that are actually fundamental to healthy social development and healthy social
Mhm.
structure. And when your kid, comes home from having, some guy dressed up as a demon chick showing them, sodomy videos, your kid, you can't take that out of their head.
Yeah.
So I really respect Nikki Gaylord for standing up for others, and I hope the Department of Education in Australia well, I hope the people in it that are complicit in this nonsense and abuse of children are receiving some form of discipline ultimately.
Yep. Mark,
Well, what do
this
you got
next
from
one.
the Supreme Court? Yeah.
Yeah, there's more cases that have been going on. This one in Idaho and West Virginia. You know, there's efforts to try to safeguard the fairness of women's sports and athletics. You know, so these are battles between, people saying, we need to protect women, we need to protect their sports, we need to keep it safe for them by keeping confused men out of women's sports. And then you've got these lawyers that are advocating for the inclusion of men in women's sports. And so I think we had a similar situation to this last week or a couple of weeks ago where, they're asking for a definition of sex of these people that are defending men being in women's sports. And they say things like, well, we don't have a definition of sex for the court. Or another one said, oh, I think there is a whole range of sex-based characteristics that give rise to discrimination. I think the purpose is to make sure that sex isn't being used to discriminate. But when you ask them what sex is, they say, well, we don't have an accurate definition of sex. Like it's bizarro landmark. I just think that I don't know how these lawyers in good conscience could make these arguments and save face, but it's part of well, we talked about the great reveal that's going on, and we're seeing where people stand pretty clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. These are clearly financial prostitutes because they know they're wrong. They can't make an argument, but they're still willing to put a suit and a tie on
Yep.
and go into the courts and try to advance these agendas. They should be ashamed of themselves. Well, this week, the Supreme Court of the United States struck down a California policy that prohibited school personnel from notifying parents when students requested changes to their gender identity at school. So, among the California public school policies were rules prohibiting teachers from telling parents if their children began going by a different name and in gender. The rules also forced teachers to use those new names and pronouns when parents weren't around. Lawyers for the state argued the policies were meant to give children a safe learning environment and ensure that they can learn without fear of being outed to their parents before they are ready. The Supreme Court wrote in its decision, the state argues that its policies advance a compelling interest in student safety and privacy. But those policies cut out the primary protectors of children's best interests, their parents. Under long established precedent, parents, not the state, have primary authority with respect to the upbringing and education of their children. God bless the
Mhm.
judge in the Supreme Court of the U.S. that struck that down. Ted, what are your thoughts on this item?
Yeah, it gives you hope again for the rule of law when they make these kind of decisions. I mean, that policy in California not only harms kids, but it's also, I can't imagine being a teacher in a school knowing that you're lying to parents. You're also participating in the harming of children, but you're forced to do that by school policy. You know, again, it just shows how bizarre it is. But the win of the week is that the Supreme Court recognized that that policy needs to end. And even more than that, what they said is that it's the parents who are really the protectors, the primary protectors of children's best interests. So hallelujah.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is going to be liberating for the teachers there. And I mean, it's a shame, you know, not all teachers have the moral and psychological fortitude of, for instance, like Josh Alexander's parents to just
Right.
stand up for this stuff. But I imagine that a teacher being told to do this stuff, being told to lie to parents as their child goes on a whacked out psychological experiment leading to a surgical experiment, being told to lie to the parents and cover it up. I imagine that to me, that would feel a lot like being a puppy dog and having your face smushed in your poo on the floor.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, it's such a humiliating, degrading thing to do. I would argue even it's not worth it for the money. But hey, a lot of people, money does tend to have a lot of control over people. So how liberating it'll be for these teachers to go, oh my God, thank God I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a really good one to see moving forward. It's nice when once you see some of these old world courts actually do something intelligent.
Yep. They have a pulse still.
Yeah.
This next one is we don't have all the details, but it was ruled this week that 7 Air Canada pilots won their arbitration over the denial of their religious exemptions for the COVID-19 jabs, and they've been awarded compensation. So good for them. That means there's at least 7 pilots with Air Canada that we can feel confident that they know how to steer a plane. I don't know about the others though,
Yeah.
Mark.
Well, I'll tell you, as a medical expert who's studied a lot of ECGs in my life, I get on a plane now and I close my eyes. I got to be careful not to imagine the pilot's ECG with that prolonged PR interval resulting from the shots. That they instead of them going, "Oh my God, we were wrong," these guys are now at risk of like developing a cardiac arrhythmia while flying a plane. And instead, they said, oh, guess what? The normal PR interval is bigger than it used to be. It's like, when the government raises the level of mercury you can eat because there's that much mercury in your food. So, yeah, I'd love to be on a plane with these 7 pilots and I can just kind of look at them and picture their heart doing a normal rhythm and maintaining it the whole time I like, read my book and take a nap, as
Yeah.
opposed to praying like mad the whole time. Dear God, don't let that PR interval slip into second-degree heart block while this plane's in the air. Well, Ted, here's something out of Indiana. An Indiana school district agreed to pay
Wow.
$650,000 to settle a lawsuit with just one man, a lawsuit from John Kluge, who was a music teacher, after school officials forced him to resign for declining to refer to students using terms that were inconsistent with their sex, which violated his religious beliefs. Kluge taught orchestra and music theory at Brownsburg High School for several years before the school district mandated that he use terminology that violated his religious beliefs. He initially reached an agreement with school officials in 2017 that would allow him to address students by their last name, like a coach. But after a few students and teachers complained, Brownsburg announced a new policy that rejected all religious accommodations, revoked its accommodation for Kluge, and forced him to resign, of course, because he wouldn't submit. Anyways, counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom said, we hope this settlement shows teachers that they do not have to bow the knee to ideologic mandates that violate their religious beliefs. And schools should learn that refusing to accommodate religious exemptions, religious employees can be illegal and expensive. And $650,000 to one teacher, that's a fair chunk
Wow.
of coin.
Wow. That's a nice settlement, and I hope that sends a pretty strong message not only to the Indiana school district, but to every school district around the world. And good for Kluge, and good for his lawyers that were successful in this effort. I just think that now it's time for every teacher to step up that was violated in this way and ask for their share of compensation too.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, that brings us to the truth bombs, telling it like it is. What's our top telling it like it is report this week, Ted?
Well, we've got a few really good things here, Mark, that I get a kick out of because again, what I like about these are truth bombs. That there's something about truth that when you hear it, it lifts me up. But this one is a funny one. So during an interview with CNN this week, California Governor Gavin Newsom attempted to distance himself from the more radical elements on the political left. This is what Newsom said during the interview. He said the Democratic Party needs to be, dare I say, more culturally normal, less prone to spending a disproportionate amount of time on pronouns and identity politics, and more focused on table talk issues, things that really matter. Yeah, this is Gavin Newsom. Now, the backstory is that he's apparently positioning himself to run for president of the United States in 2028. So I guess he realizes that being attached to these really bizarre ideologies is probably not good for his success in that endeavor. But the problem is that, he's been one of the leading cheerleaders for a lot of this nonsense. And so, for example, in 2022, Newsom designated California as the country's first sanctuary state for gender confused children. He also approved the Menstrual Equity for All Act of 2021. And that was an act that required all public schools in the state of California to have free menstrual products in men's bathrooms in California. He also signed the California Freedom to Read Act, which prohibits the removal of books from libraries that contain sexual content, unacceptable sexual content. He thinks that people need to have the freedom to read that stuff. It banned local communities from voting to keep out that kind of content out of their library. So he doesn't have a very good track record in his efforts to distance himself from the more radical elements. I'd say he's been the Pied Piper of the radical left for quite a while. So good luck to Gavin Newsom in his efforts to distance himself.
Yeah, and and good luck to the public to not elect this guy as president, because you really need to recognize a prostitute when you see one. And what I mean by that is this guy's clearly got, people just looking at polls, looking at how to manipulate the public, how to get elected, and he will say whatever works to get into office and then help us. Then Lord help us. So let's hope people are too smart for this guy.
Yeah.
But it's amazing that these people, they really believe that humans have the memory of a goldfish, and unfortunately, a lot do, but not everybody does. And you can look at these contrasting states and moves by Gavin Newsom on LifeSite News. Well, we got some news from Monty Python, John Cleese. What's going on with John Cleese, Ted?
Well, he's doing a cross-Canada tour of his comedy routine, and because of the significant fine that was imposed upon former school trustee Barry Neufeld, who's been ordered to pay $750,000 to a teachers union because they had their feelings hurt by him saying that there's only two sexes. John Cleese has said, wait, well, I clearly can't be in British Columbia, given that's the kind of culture that's there. So he's backed out of doing the shows that he had scheduled for British Columbia. He said, I've been labeled transphobic by illiterates. I've asked them if the fact that they disagree with me means that they're Cleese-phobic. I didn't get a reply. So the article points out that there is a precedent set for prosecution of comedians in British Columbia, and they reference back in 2011, Human Rights Tribunal ordered comedian Guy Earle to pay $15,000 to a member of his audience for what was alleged as lasting physical and psychological effect of his homophobic jokes during his set. And the comedian Earl petitioned for review of that fine, but the BC Supreme Court dismissed it. So it tells you that it's not only the Human Rights Tribunal that's wonky in British Columbia, it's the BC Supreme Court as well.
Ted, I think BC, when I'm talking to American counterparts in the Truth and Freedom Movement, actually, when I'm talking to Mexican doctors, Argentinian doctors, they like literally, if we're in person, they hug me and they cry for me a little. Honestly, they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
Mark, you're from Canada. It's so bad to be from Canada." But in this, you know, I guess Canadians somehow by destiny being put in a position to take on the worst of, or some of the worst of the globalist cabal. I think BC, wow, like just look at today. I mean, you've got a hilarious, famous comedian coming to Canada, but he's not coming to BC because he
Yeah.
might get in trouble for making you laugh. You've got doctors, nurses, chiropractors, everybody fleeing the province with an April 1st deadline to just do whatever they're told to their bodies and others. You know,
And they've
so
just given away Vancouver to the native tribe.
oh yeah, and they gave away your land to boot. So boy, if you're out in BC, we're praying for you. Thank God you got Dallas Brody, Ted Kuntz, and a bunch of good people. But I just want to everybody take a moment and pray for the good people of British Columbia because as beautiful as the land is, it's a hard place for freedom right now.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of BC, Chilliwack, BC, school board member Laurie Thronis said he is stepping down from his position due to a recent BC Human Rights Tribunal judgment against former trustee Barry Neufeld. So once again, folks in BC are losing, losing, losing because of this whacked out government and their Human Rights Tribunal. Anyways, so in his resignation statement, Thronis said the ruling against Neufeld has made him no longer feel safe in expressing views on the board. I can no longer do my job, he said in his February resignation statement. He wrote, all democratically elected officials must feel comfortable to speak their mind without worrying about accusations of workplace discrimination. Since I no longer feel safe in expressing myself on the board in legitimate ways, the only proper course is to resign. In announcing his resignation, Thronis called on BC's legislator to pass a bill guaranteeing free speech for school board trustees such as himself. I call upon the BC legislators to affirm the freedom of speech upon which democracy relies and pass a bill placing the speech of school board trustees, municipal councillors, and regional district directors outside the purview of the tribunal. He is asking the devil to shut down hell. I don't know if it's going to work, but Ted, what are your thoughts being a BC man?
Yeah, I feel, I mean, I completely understand his position. It's not a safe place to be. You know, what comes to my mind, he's talking about not feeling safe. And if you're black or gay or transgender or whatever, if you say I don't feel safe, the BC Human Rights Tribunal jumps to your defense and protects you. But in this case, I'm not expecting the BC Human Rights Tribunal will come to his aid.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, we have to highlight it because we got to keep the kids safe. If we don't get the kids to the next generation, like we don't help these children grow up to be functional, intelligent adults who are physically, mentally healthy, that can have children, raise families, etc., then we're done.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
super important. And if the people on the school board are saying, I'm not safe to do my job. I can be elected, but when I get in here, I got a piece of tape on my mouth. And unless I go along with things that I clearly feel are harmful to children. So if you're in BC, try not to put your kid on that bus.
Yeah.
Better get some books and homeschool them.
This next one, Mark, is an opinion piece that was in the Epoch Times this week, and I liked what he had to say. He said, for more than a decade, Western political discourse has been dominated by a single all-purpose accusation, hate. Those who question prevailing orthodoxies on identity, gender, nationhood, or merit are not merely wrong, they're hateful. The irony is stark. The same woke leaders, activists, and bureaucrats who sermonize endlessly about inclusion and empathy devote extraordinary energy to uncovering and condemning hatred. But they often define it so broadly that patriotism, religious conviction, merit, scientific rigor, and even equality itself, things that for centuries nearly everyone thought of as good, are swept into the net. We are told there is no room for hate, yet increasingly there is no room for disagreement either. Cancellation does not argue, it excludes. It does not persuade, it silences. It does so in the name of diversity while enforcing a rigid uniformity of thought. Hatred becomes not a moral category describing conduct, but an accusation deployed against disagreement. In short, today's anti-colonial progressivism colonializes. Dissent is pathologized, disagreement becomes moral deviance. Pretty good
Wow.
language, huh? Pretty good message.
Yeah, sure is. And Ted thinks two things stand out for me. I mean, think of there's so many examples. Everybody can think of 100 examples, but for instance, Professor Wedison wanted to have a conversation
Mm,
about, well, where are the dead bodies? Which she's told is hate. Like asking that question is somehow hate. But anybody with eyes that can see and ears that can hear can just watch those videos and you can see where the hate's coming from.
yeah,
Like people aren't saying, we demand that you have a conversation and let us ask you questions. That's what she's there to do. And you have people say, get off the Paul, you hater, you get, I mean, like there's
yeah,
clear hatred projected at her.
yeah.
So it's upside down land with this accusation of hate against anyone who doesn't go along with it. And this you can go back to the Bolshevik Revolution and see how this nonsense, call him an anti-Semite, call him an anti-hate, call him an anti-vaxxer, call him whatever. It's just name calling to shut down anybody who isn't going along with the radical agenda that's being pushed. But another thing is, I think we should cut this thing right off at the knees, right? Because Jesus himself said,
Mhm.
love what is good, hate what is evil. So there is a role for hate in human consciousness as mandated by God or
That's a
by
good
one of the
point.
highest representatives of God, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, it should fall apart just like sawdust, sculpted into a little fake castle.
Yeah, and instead what's happening in our federal government is that they're looking to pass Bill C9 this coming week. That is the so-called anti-hate bill, which is, to me, makes everything, if you disagree with the government, that's hate. We've got some
Yeah,
work to do.
we sure do. We sure do. Well, here's something. Here's a new word for everybody. Epistemology. If you know what epistemology is already, you're doing great. You're a great linguistic expert. But here we go. Let's find out great comments on the epistemic capture that is prevalent today. And this comes from Alter Systems. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that examines the nature, origin, and limits of knowledge and what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. And the author writes, epistemically captured people are proud of being epistemically captured. They think that they are doing what one is supposed to do, fit in, parrot the consensus, pat each other on the back for being like-minded. It never occurs to them that epistemic capture exists, nor that there could ever be truth outside of social consensus. They look upon the epistemically independent as insane, reckless, and an existential threat to society. This epistemically captured worldview describes nearly everyone at the NIH, the FDA, CDC, the AAP, the ACOG, AMA. It goes on, CNN, etc. A long list of organizations, news, the Ivy League, universities, a long list. And it's a major reason why science and medicine are such a disaster today. Breaking epistemic capture is essential to the survival of the Republic and humanity. Epistemic capture is one of the least discussed, yet most devastating social diseases of our age. It is the quiet death of inquiry disguised as moral virtue. Once an institution crosses that threshold, it ceases to be a generator of knowledge and becomes a mechanism for social control. What you've described, people believing they are virtuous precisely because they conform, is how civilizations slide into intellectual decay with smiles on their
Mhm.
faces. Once conformity becomes virtue, curiosity becomes heresy. Then comes the moral inversion. Those who obey the system are convinced they're the good ones. They feel morally superior for trusting the science, for instance. Finally, it metastasizes into institutional narcissism. Their primary mission shifts from discovering truth to preserving authority. A captured epistemic ecosystem cannot self correct, it must be exposed and bypassed.
Mhm.
Ted, do you agree with that?
Well, I really enjoyed this. This is just part of a much longer essay, and I would encourage our audience to go and read the full essay. But he is describing exactly what we're witnessing is that these folks that are compliant, they're proud of their compliance. they have this kind of moral virtue that they think that they're better because they're complying with social consensus. And they see people like you and I, Mark, as being insane, reckless, and a threat to society. And so it's a very bizarre time. And what this author is pointing out is that, when you get to that place, conformity actually ends up destroying your society when you don't allow the freedom of discussion, of thought, of new ideas. And so, you see it in lots of fields of science where you have to go along, like with vaccines, for example. You can't question the vaccine paradigm. You have to believe that it's a miracle of modern medicine or you get ostracized. Well, th that same conformity exists in many areas. And when you introduce a new idea, you get attacked. But we have to be, if we're going to evolve as a society, if we're going to develop deeper wisdom, we have to allow space for the new or different ideas to be there. Anyways, I just felt like this really acknowledged the struggle that we're in at this time.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense, and we have to be aware of the human tendency. We look at the what is it, the Ashburn experiments of the 60s, where you
Mhm.
can, if five or six people in the room, even though they're lying by design of the psychology experiment, are pointing at something that's obviously not true and saying it. For instance, line one is bigger than line two, and clearly it's the
Right.
opposite. By the time you get to that one person that isn't part of the experiment, most of them go along with it. Most of them say, well, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to agree with the consensus because that's a safe thing to do. And that's a dangerous thing, even within the truth and freedom movement.
Yeah.
Like we have to have some conversations and debates. Like, I mean, I'm in a conversation right now about the implications of how to interpret antibodies to spike proteins. I mean, this is kind of maybe boring. I won't go into it. But the truth is, it is more complex than I would like it to be. And I need to keep analyzing it. We need to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And too often, in this, what do we call it? Epistemology, epistemologic society, you have groups screaming, chanting, just, horde dynamic globalist campaigns and drowning out quiet, intelligent conversations
Mhm.
that help us get to the truth. We need those quiet, intelligent conversations. And so yeah, here, free speech,
Mhm.
carry on. Ted, we got something from Bruce Party, don't we?
Yeah, here's another one from Bruce that I really like. So he's commenting on the announcement that happened this week of the Canadian government has surrendered Vancouver to the Musqueam Indian Band. And he said these agreements were negotiated secretly without public input. If the federal government wanted to calm the water over the status of private property rights in British Columbia, this was not the way to do it, which means that that's not what they wanted to do. Governments and courts have thrown BC property rights into a turmoil. They have threatened the security of exclusive title. They have undermined the ability to get mortgages and insurance. They have discouraged private investment in BC. These are not policy mistakes. The BC and federal governments understand what they are doing. A new generation of political leaders seem determined to cripple their own country. If you are surprised, you haven't been paying attention. If you're outraged, you must be a settler. If you are a private owner, property owner in the lower mainland of Vancouver, suck it up for reconciliation. After all, we live on native land. Haven't you been paying attention to land acknowledgements? Many Canadians cannot even recognize the attack. Their devotion to reconciliation gets in the way. They are stuck in a stupor of acquiescence and disbelief. Then he goes on to say the beaver is too good for Canada's national symbol. The country deserves the ostrich. And then I added my comment to his article. I said, and you know what they do with ostriches? They kill them.
After they use them. Yeah, Ted, I think, we were in a conversation earlier today, you and I, with an expert presenting some ideas that I think are relevant here. And you and I both know we need to study that before we know the validity of certain thoughts in that. However, one thing that stands out is that the First Nations are being used by the enemy of all people. whether you're First Nation or you're Second Nation or whatever you want to be. But, and so this divide and conquer, appearing to give things to one group of people, in this case to 1,025 people, I think, to getting to own, I think, three cities in theory, in one theory. If we think that the United Nations is really trying to support Aboriginal people as opposed to use them to divide and conquer, then we're very naive.
Mhm.
And I hope that our brothers and sisters who are First Nations, that they recognize that, and that we all work together to take down the parasite class rather than having the parasite class slam us into each other.
This last one we
Hmm.
got, Mark, maybe I'll share it.
Yes, please.
In a letter to BC Premier David Eby. This was written by colleague Wayne Llewellyn, and he says the court's betrayal here is simple and non-negotiable. British Columbia is a constitutional democracy founded on equal citizenship under one law. The law applies to individuals, not racial or ancestral categories. Handing out differential political power, consent rights, or veto authority based on lineage shreds that principle. It's not anti-Indigenous, it's pro-equality, pro-rule of law, and it's what keeps this province from sliding into fragmented, race-based governance that no one voted for and no one, except perhaps you, David Eby, wants. Reconciliation doesn't mean dismantling equal citizenship to create parallel sovereignties. It doesn't mean turning fee simple into a conditional privilege while muttering reassurances only when the backlash hits fever pitch. If constitutional surgery is needed to fix this ambiguity, do it openly through the legislature with real debate. Affirm the fundamentals once and for all, true equality of all citizens before and under the law with absolutely no ancestry-based exceptions, absolute inviolability of private fee, simple property, no political authority in Canada derived from race, ethnicity, or bloodline. Good words from Wayne Llewellyn.
Yeah, I love Wayne's writing. And folks, you'll find Wayne actually, I'm very honored that Wayne is one of the frequent commenters on Wins of the
Mm.
Week. Sometimes he shares like really like techniques and understanding and tools that are really helpful. So great insights from Wayne.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, that's kind of the end of our official list for the week. I mean, we could go on all day. There's all sorts of great things happening, but you've got some NCI hearings to hold starting March 9th, which is the day
Right.
after these wins of the week are released. So one call to action, folks, if you're in BC or anywhere close to Kelowna, March 9th to 11th, are farmers safe in Canada? Also known as Will You Continue to Eat and Stay Alive in Canada? That's a really big one. Have you got some other calls to action, Ted?
Well, I think that's the big one. And if you can't join us in person, join us virtually. All of it is live streamed, starting at 9 in the morning BC time and ending at 6. This week, apparently, our federal government is going to finish up their conversation about Bill C9, which is the so-called anti-hate bill, which I believe is should be called the censorship bill. And what's interesting, what's ironic, I guess, is probably the more accurate word is they want to censor the discussion around the censorship bill. Again, we talked about the Health Professions Occupation Act in BC that is implemented April 1st. I think if you have an opportunity to be in Victoria on Tuesday, Jordan Keeley is going to introduce a private members bill in the legislature. So if you can attend the legislature and be visible. And I would just say to folks about everything that you're concerned about, speak up, speak out, stand up. This is not the time to comply.
Amen to all that.
Now you've
Well,
got a song
folks,
for us.
I do. Ted, I went through quite a bit. And before we go to the song, I want to mention, hey, folks, thank you for your participation in comments. We didn't dive into comments this week because a lot of the comments were very involved, but there's a great dialogue going on in the comments. I enjoy being a part of it. I get to communicate with a bunch of you every week, and I love it. So please keep the comments coming. Folks, if you're able to click that like button, that actually helps us. Wherever you're watching, whatever part of this, or if you're watching the whole thing on drtrozy.news or Dr. Trozy Substack, please come and subscribe. You can choose a paid subscription or a free subscription. And we just love to have you, be a regular part of this experience for us. So Ted, last week actually I we went out on a pretty cool limb and we put out a song of human beings who weren't even color coded, worshiping God and thanking God and doing the thing the globalists least want us to do, which is to be spiritually connected. And got some beautiful feedback from that, including from David. And David, forgive me, I didn't end up choosing the song you recommended, though, folks. You'll see a very neat Foo Fighters massive concert that David shared in last week's comments. In the end, after swimming through a bunch of songs, everything from music in many languages, I ended up in the end going, you know what? I'm going to play Bob Marley and want to play the song known by two names, either known as War or No More Trouble. There's some beautiful lyrics in this. And so, folks, I hope you enjoy a little bit of reggae grooving. You'll have to click the link to start the music video, but please enjoy. Have a fabulous week. Ted, thanks for everything you're doing. And we're really looking forward to learning more about the food situation in Canada from the NCI. Take good care of yourselves, folks. Remember some basics: hydrate, stretch, stay physically active, stay spiritually connected, don't panic. And we'll see you again next week with a whole bunch of new wins.
I look forward to it. We'll see you next week. Till then.
Till then.